So just to say, hello and welcome. So today I wanted to look at where we are now at the 1 year on, and to consider what and how to think about our roadmap for the next months and year ahead. Here we are with this 1 year milestone. It's very much a case of looking at a full 12 months. We've been constantly vigilant. We've dealt with uncertainty, anxiety. Many people have had a lot of grief and loss. There's been almost total lack of control. And I think for everybody, there's been a form of forced change. I think that what I want us to think about here is that milestones are transitions, and transitions are opportunities. So it's a very good time for us to reflect and reset. It's a year that has, I think some people would describe it as a terrible year for them. Some people will describe it as a year that has had many positive aspects for them. But either way, we've experienced unusual level of anxiety and uncertainty. And I think we should not underestimate how tiring and wearing that is. A prolonged exposure to uncertainty, anxiety, and lack of control, and a constant vigilance really changes our responses to everything. You'll just discover that you are more what we call kind of hyper aware and alert to possible dangers, possible things that you should be taking care of. It's helpful to notice that change and to work to counter it if you see that some of the results of it are not positive. As an example, constant vigilance creates that hyper-awareness that I'm talking about. And so you might see danger now in really quite innocent situations. And this may have been helpful in the early days of the pandemic when we really didn't know how it was transmitted or how virulent the virus was. But this may be less helpful in some other circumstances now that we know more, and it may lead to increased nervousness that is not generally good for us. I put this, as you know, I like the Roz Chast cartoons that the New Yorker has a lot of. And so I put this down as I think a rather good description of some people on their first time out. We're very used to not being with other people. We're very used to not being out. And so you've got the how do I talk to people, two people at the same time, someone saying, am I smiling enough or is it too much? And the third person is, well, should we all be standing this close? I think that we're very used to having more space, and it's rather disturbing sometimes when people come into our space. Anyway, this is a chance to reflect. To quote Churchill again, never let a good crisis go to waste. But it's time to review your goals. So think about both the old ones, the ones you used to have, the new ones, the ones that you may have to change and may want to go towards. Try to get a perspective on the changes that you've made in your life. Some have been in response to the pandemic, routines, living situations, the goals and the outcomes. Some of them may have been forced on you, but equally, there are probably some you'd like to embrace, maybe to take on with you. Note your own growth in resilience. I think that we talked a lot about this last month when we were talking about boosting resilience and how inevitably, though you may feel worn down, the fact is, you're here and you are, plugging on and digging in, and that is in itself a resilience and shows a sign of strength. It's a year of being forced to slow down and shorten our horizons, and that can lead to an increase on the clarity of our priorities, and certainly to a different view of our priorities. It will probably happen naturally, but it's important to notice it in order to fix it into your consciousness. Try and use a neutral lens, be aware of what your biases are, be aware of what your temperament is, and try and take a step back and get some perspective. All the research shows what we probably know ourselves, but all the research shows that we have a remarkable capacity for change and for adaptation. And so we can take advantage of that. And remember what we were talking about last month is there is this silver lining of the post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth comes when you have this combination of both a clarity of the way things are now, and a hope for the future and how they will be. One thing that I think would be interesting to think about is the growth mindset. The research book I've been reading this month, last month it was on grit and resilience, and this month it's on mindset. It's a book by Carol Dweck, and it's very interesting and explains the fact that we can fall into two groups, and we either have a growth or a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset is believing your qualities, whether it's intelligence, leadership, capabilities, are carved in stone. And it often creates a need to prove yourself over and again. And you believe that you have this certain limited amount of these characteristics often leads you to proving yourself time and again, and feeling that every situation is a win or lose moment. One of the interesting things that Dweck herself described was that her own third grade school teacher put the students in IQ order, and that's the way they sat, and that was the way they were allowed to answer questions. If you have a growth mindset, you know that the hand you're dealt with is just a starting point to be developed. Basic qualities can be cultivated through effort, strategies, and help from others. You basically believe that your true potential is unknown and unknowable. All the research is showing that this has a greater happiness, and you are more inclusive, you're more open to support. I think that it supports suitable risk-taking. I'm not talking about the kind of crazy actions, but I'm talking about encouraging us to get out of our comfort zone. It takes the sting out of failure. You understand that failure is literally on the way to growth. It's not something that you're stopping and that is a judgment on you. It's an opportunity to think, well, how am I going to use that to improve, to learn, to do it better next time? And it allows you more effectively to lean into opportunities. In the research, they've done some fMRI imaging of your brain, and having split people into either growth or fixed mindset, what they discover that people in the growth mindset, their brains are literally more active when there is an opportunity to learn. They sort of wake up and pay attention in a way that others do not. The research all shows that we have, as humans, we generally have a much greater capacity for lifelong learning than we had ever believed before. And the other most exciting part of the research is that you can clearly change your mindset. If you recognize that you have this more fixed mindset, it's something that you really can change, and you can move towards the growth mindset with all its benefits. So I wanted to take this moment to say, well, here we are at this year, we're looking forward. What does re-entry look like? It's going to be different depending on where you are. It's going to be different depending on the household you're in. But what I think it's important to do is to manage your expectations and to manage your sense of what it is that you will be dealing with and what it is that is also possible. So are you a person who's generally trying to return to how things were, to what was? Is that what is appealing to you? There's nothing wrong with that. Inherently, that's a choice, but there will inevitably be some differences. So if you are trying to return to a pre-pandemic norm, it's worth really thinking through what's possible and what will be impossible, because some things will be permanently changed. And if you have thought through what they are, it allows you to avoid the frustration. Are you instead trying to move towards something new? Are you trying to aim for a reach goal, but a doable goal, something that's different? And if you are interested in new goals, is it something that was derailed from before the pandemic that you want to put back on the rails, or is it something that you've developed during the pandemic, where you've realized something new in your activity or what you were doing or your interests, and you want to follow that through? And also, even if you are wanting really to return to the old status quo, there are probably some things you'd like to do differently anyway. Either way, you want to use this time of broken and changed habits. By necessity, they've been broken and changed, but use it as an opportunity to set down the new ones that you would like. So use this time. You're looking backwards in order to look forward. Think about the pre-pandemic situation. What was that like? And try and describe your now. Try and describe as realistically as possible how things look now, because it'll give you the most effective opportunity to really work out how you want to change that. Think about what you've done differently and what you'd like to continue. I think that it's an interesting question to ask yourself, is really sort of saying what was forced onto me this year, but was a positive and is something that I need to take through, in which case you need to think about how you're going to do that. If you're trying to work out how to ask those questions of yourself, I think some people find that very easy, and that self-awareness and sort of self-study is something that comes to them naturally. But I think for others, you may find a prompt helpful. I often find it's a good opportunity to sit down and set a time aside, because even in these sort of quarantine or more lockdown times, the days can get very busy and the times can pass. So if you're stuck, there's no surprises there. We've spent an entire year with a lot of lack of control, and this can lead to chronic indecision. It can lead to a kind of lack of that usual thinking about what it is you want to do and where it is that you want to go. So be your own detective. Ask yourself the question, what would I like to feel more of or less of? Ask yourself, what would you like to do more of or less of? Ask what you would like to think more of or less of. What is your biggest fear? And what is your greatest hope? Those are ways to sort of flush out some of the things that may have been playing around in the back of your head but not come to the fore because you haven't had an opportunity to think about, well, what am I going to do about this? I think this is the opportunity. We also have what I often work with clients and call the magic wand question. And the question is, if I could change one thing, if I could wake up tomorrow and I've waved a magic wand and I've changed one thing, what would that be? People have very different answers to this question, but it can often be quite telling as to what is going on in your mindset, or something that you are really have been considering and maybe don't even think is possible, but it's something that you would want to consider when you're making your plans for the future. So the process is very different if you're depending on whether you're alone or you're part of a larger group. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, of course, but let's look at some of the ways to navigate this if you're alone or if you're used to thinking solo, thinking alone. The dangers of being alone or with that habit of thinking alone is that our thoughts can be effectively in an echo chamber. So how do we counter that? How do we counter the echo chamber effect? So conversations can be helpful. Think about whose opinion you respect. Whose opinion would you actually want to have on the things that you're planning and the things that you're thinking about? Invite them to give you feedback on what your plans are. Invite them to maybe give you a reality check. If you're working just sort of, as I say, in your own echo chamber, often we can build up plans that really just don't seem reasonable to other people from the outside. And that's helpful to hear that. And maybe ask them to give you some new ideas. I think that when you're having the conversation, one thing to do is to really explore your areas of uncertainty and the lack of information that you may have that somebody else may be able to offer both information and an external view. And I like to think about the red team approach that Daniel Kahneman brought up in his book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is another good read. And the idea of the red team, he sort of put it forward in many ways for corporate situations, which is to have somebody who will not just be there just as your cheerleader saying, oh, it all sounds fantastic, but whose job it is to poke holes. The job of the red team is to work out what's wrong with your plan. And it's not as a way of destroying your plan. It's a way of trying to think through what the problems may be, what the holes are in it. And it gives you a chance then to kind of rethink it and to plan ahead for what those pitfalls might be. So remember the importance of perspective. I used one of the cartoons from the New Yorker last month, and here is another one where the therapist, who I think is an alligator here, is saying to his client, well, would you worry less about your relationship if I told you we're about to get hit by a giant asteroid? I mean, it's just the idea that sometimes we can get so honed in on something that we can't see the wood for the trees. You know, we're really kind of detailed and on sort of focused in, and it's helpful sometimes to be able to sort of step back, and in order to really kind of see where you are, you have to kind of start thinking, well, another point of view, another perspective. That is very helpful. If you're with others, on the other hand, so the first was if you were alone or tend to be a solo thinker, and this one is for those of you who like to make decisions as a group or who are living in families or part of a couple, a group of roommates, co-workers. But if you're with other people, there's different challenges. It's worth investing real time and effort in talking about talking. So discuss your assumptions, explore each person's beliefs and values, the priorities and the expectations before you start the conversation. What is each person's comfort level of safety? What is each person's view of what a sensible policy or plan would be? I think you need to discuss the assumptions, the expectations, and finally discuss the goals. Ask what each person is thinking about for a plan. Is it a plan for 1 week? Is it for a month? Are we talking about for the rest of the year? Are you working on plans just for 2 of you, for the whole family? It's going to be different. And one of the things to remember is that all of you will have different lenses, that the lenses come from many different sources. You've got temperaments, we have different experiences. What news we expose ourselves to will affect what our lens is and who we're influenced by. Try and find common ground, try and find a compromise. It's something that can be acceptable to all, avoiding the absolutes. How do you prepare for a conversation? I've used this slide in the previous webinar when we were prepping for family and household conversations, when we were first thinking about re-entry, which was back in late spring of last year, early summer. And so I'm only going to go through it quickly, but let's review it as some of these points will come in usefully now. Plan ahead, state your objectives, avoid surprises, set up a time for a meeting. Don't just sort of jump in on something. It's like, oh, you're here. You've been thinking about it for days, but they suddenly have it jumped on them as a surprise. Don't do it on a deadline. Try to avoid time pressure, which increases the stress of any conversation. Try and give yourself some space, but also add a time limit. Endless conversations tend to deteriorate. And I think to set a goal or to set a time limit is helpful. And invite people to join in. I think, try not to demand it, that instead have it as something where people are coming to it willingly with their own thoughts and plans. And remember that conversations are layered. I think a lot of us think we have one conversation and we make a decision and then that's it. And there's a lot of temptation to doing that because it feels that you've kind of got a plan and can move forward. But I think it's more positive to think about ending on a positive note. It's more beneficial, let's say, to think about ending on a positive note. And then if there's more that you need to discuss or to review, schedule it as a follow-up conversation. Quickly, let's look again at the conversation guidelines. Make some of them quite explicit in the group, because I think it's useful to have ground rules. Respect language, tone, and body language. Try and use as many I statements as possible. Ask everyone to talk about how they feel, not how it is. And listen, just listening involves trying to understand what they want to represent as their viewpoint. Try and be curious, ask for clarification. That's all part of the kind of not assuming and not making assumptions ahead of time. And remember that being heard has a value per se. I think all of us find it easier to get on board with any plan if we feel we've been heard in the creation of the plan. Then just look quickly, keep in mind things that you'll be talking about. Remember, for some people, this is still a safety plan. For others, it's about getting into the outside world. So you want to talk about goals, general guidelines. The picture of the multiple tulips is really think of as many as possible that you need to be considering. And then once you've thought of the larger amount, kind of come down to make some of the specific decisions that you need to make. Make room for differing opinions. As we said, that people come with different experiences, different perspectives. Shutting down opinions tend not to work. As I say, it's much better to let people air it and really have a discussion. If you can't come to an agreement in one conversation, come back to it later. You don't need to agree on everything. You're coming together to agree on a plan. So leave the differences in assumptions or perspectives. If you can actually come to a plan, and don't try and get everybody to agree on every aspect of it. It's just a way to kind of move forward. While you're doing that, examine people's triggers, your own, others, examine the inconsistencies, things that have come with the past experiences, to really try and be as open and vulnerable about what you're dealing with and going through and what you're experiencing, and it will help others to do the same. And then also just try and get a sense of what the meaning and values are underneath what you're talking about, because often we're talking on one surface, but our feelings and emotions and the values and meaning are at another lower level, which is worth really trying to delve into. Health and safety is a hot topic. It's always going to be hard to talk about. And so I think it's also important not just to be talking about the dangers and the problems and how you're going to do something new, but also what's been going well and what do you feel has been a sort of success to date, and how can you replicate that going forward. What do you do if you get to an impasse? It's really okay to get to an impasse. I think it's not uncommon. Don't panic. This happens a lot. One of the things that we use a lot in working with families and with couples is this process where each person identifies one item that is for them non-negotiable, something that is just incredibly important for them, and they need the other person to understand that this is something that is sort of essential. To choose one item that is an ask, something I would ask of you to do for me. Maybe we're struggling with a plan and I just said, if there's one thing I'd ask you to do for me, it is X. It is to let me know before you're going to a larger event, including more people. And then an offer, something that I think I can offer to the group, I can offer to the plan going forward, which I think will help other people. So it's about being collaborative, and it's finding a collaborative way through the blockage so that you're not dictating, and that you finish the conversation with each person having sort of asked and offered something. Use this as a basis for the next conversation. If it's easier to compromise once we've been heard. So when everybody's had a chance to do this, to state the non-negotiable, the ask and the offer, it'll be much easier for them to discuss. And it kind of clarifies what some of the steps forward can be. And so I find that this is very helpful, a way of getting out of the impasse. Let's look at the potential pitfalls, just to do a kind of quick review of some of the things that we've been talking about and some things that will be coming up. It's helpful to look at the pitfalls ahead of time, because that gives you a way to prepare for them and not to be knocked off your kind of direction because you've been surprised by them. I think it's really important to think ahead and understand what may be barriers to you moving forward, having your re-entry plan, kind of going into your plan for the next months and years. So one of them is the fear of the unknown. A lot of us have spent time much more on our own, much more vigilant, as we were saying earlier. Some people have really been very locked down. They've not left their apartments or their houses for months and months. And so I think it's very hard to overcome that. That's going to be something that's difficult. We talked about the echo chamber. If you're on your own or if you're in a small group and really just not getting much information from other people's viewpoints, I think that you can end up in this echo chamber, which is often not helpful. The risk aversion piece, that goes back to the fear of the unknown. Work out where you are on that dial. If it's very low risk, do you need to challenge yourself to push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone? If you have higher levels of risk tolerance, do you need to think about some of the people you're with and helping them either come to a place with you if you think it's a reasonable level of risk tolerance, or maybe dial it down if you feel that maybe it's making other people uncomfortable. Anxiety. I mean, we talked about this for months now, the fact that there's this increased anxiety. All the pandemic has increased that. All the unknown has made it very difficult for us to sort of stay calm. And as we've also talked about quite a lot, there's this idea that when you get very anxious, you can get very emotionally flooded. When you get emotionally flooded, you get into that reactive low road where you're really not thinking in your prefrontal cortex. You're thinking in the amygdala part of your brain, which is very much the fight and flight response. You're either paralyzed or you're fighting back or you're fleeing. None of them are the more nuanced and thoughtful ways that you probably want to think through your plans. there's lots of difficult and different health considerations that each person has. And I understand that that is not over yet, and that may still be part of your life and your considerations. And so I definitely want everybody to be kind of aware of that, those will come up, and those are the potential pitfalls going forward. Those I'm not sure you can plan for, except just to know that that they're still out there, either as a day-to-day part of your life or as something that will potentially come up. We've got our stubborn habits. It's really hard to break habits. I think this year has been an opportunity in a way, in that things have changed, but we've got into new habits, some of them good, some of them bad. Try and think through what they are. We've got competing goals. If we just had one goal, it's a lot easier to go towards it, but we don't. We probably have individual goals. We have different ones from our family. We may have different ones for ourselves in our personal lives than we would have in our work lives. So that's something that it can often decrease the power of our plans and our going forward. And change is hard. It just always is. As we're looking at these potential pitfalls, these are some of the reasons why, but it's just something that is something we need to be very mindful about and very intentional about in order to make it happen. But there's the positive counterpoint. So what do we have at hand to counterbalance those pitfalls? This is where the positive counterpoints come to the fore. Some of them are ones, again, we've been talking about really for a full year now. It's the self-care piece. If you know that the conversation is going to be stressful, or you're going to be dealing with something difficult by going into the outside world, you want to really introduce, if you haven't already, or maintain, if you have already, the self-care that creates that positive spiral. The benefits feed on themselves. So focus on sleep, exercise, mindfulness, and healthy eating. Team effort, support, anxiety is very lonely. You get in your head, you kind of get in a sort of a whirl of concerns. So make an effort to connect and make decisions jointly, and try and spend time, with people and getting their perspective. The thinking high road, that's, as we know, the counterpoint to the reactive low road. The thinking high road is to keep the conversation calm and on an even keel. It's the way of staying in your prefrontal cortex. If you manage to do this, the more you manage to do it, it is reinforcing. It will get easier. It's often difficult to start with, but the more you do it, the more your brain is literally building the muscles to do it more easily next time. They become the habits because you are reinforcing your neural pathways. If you're aiming for reasonable compromise, you're trying to avoid absolutes, you're trying to avoid something being totally right for everybody, you're trying to give everybody a little bit of a sort of a win, a little bit of a success, and to feel that you have maybe gain some of the plans that you need and some of the compromises that you need, but also that you've given to others. Listen. If we listen to ourselves, if we're listening to others very carefully, I think that we find that we can get a lot of new information that we didn't really know we didn't know was out there, and we didn't know that other people were thinking. And listening to ourselves is a way, I think, that we can really kind of take the temperature of where we are now and how we're going to move forward. Change is hard, yes, but it's possible. So just keep sticking with it. Again, remember that with the neural pathway reinforcement, the more you keep trying, the more likely you are to have success. And that this year, in some ways, is an opportunity for profound change that is that post-traumatic growth that we were talking about earlier. I feel that it's really something that if we can keep that sense that it isn't all negative. I think some people do see it through that lens, but if you make the effort to think about what has been positive, what you're grateful for, what you can move towards with very kind of engaged sense of hope, I think that is something that, again, you can change that slightly negative lens that you may have and make it more positive. Those of you who already have the positive lens, it is contagious. Talk about it, spend time really sort of dwelling on that with yourself and with others, because I think it really does help people shift into a kind of positive going forward. So finding our new normal, finding the re-entry piece here, be intentional. It's not going to just happen by itself. Invest the time to think about it, invest time to have the conversations, reflect on this past year, really try and be as clear-eyed about how it is now, how it was, and arm yourself with that information, and with that, you explore the hopes and the goals and the choices for the year ahead. Going into the unknown is fraught. Maybe things are looking up. Maybe you know plenty of people who've had vaccines or feel that the infection rate is much lower. But even so, the unknown is difficult, and compassion is key, both to yourself, if you're finding it difficult to make that step forward, or if you're finding it easy and you find others are being hesitant, take time with them, be compassionate. It's a difficult move for most people. And remember that any of the plans you make are not necessarily set in stone. You get a chance to review, you get a chance to rethink them. I think what's valuable is you take your plans, you go forward with them, and then you come back and review and say, what's working, let's do more of that, and what isn't working, that's something that you can change. So I always end up with this piece where every day is a new day and a new opportunity to do things differently and better. And I think that these milestones and this year anniversary is in particular an opportunity to do things differently and better. It's a moment which allows us to rethink. It's a way of almost the way we look at a new year sometimes, and we choose that as a moment to make our resolutions. Take this as an opportunity to sit down and really think where you think you are and where you want to be going. Thank you all for listening, and hoping that maybe some of you can share the news of either what you've been up to or what plans that you are making. I think it's often helpful for us to realize what other people are doing.